City Clerk, do you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I probably won't say anything else during the meeting, as you know.
Thank you.
City Clerk, do you hear me?
Photoshop that thing.
It's like Orson.
Can somebody else say something so my picture gets off that screen?
Are you in Doketown?
Me, yeah. Me and Eric are in different rooms.
He's here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call to order tonight's Council and Committee Budget 2021 meeting. Our meeting this evening will start with my reminder that members of Council must disclose if they have a conflict of interest in any matter, which is the subject of a consideration before Council. And then we'll proceed on to a presentation by Ken Forrest and Alicia Keating. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to bat lead tonight, and then Alicia's going to follow up. As is our usual kind of course with council, I'm going to present to you what has been identified as the potential capital budget on the general side for 2021. There's this information in your package this evening that runs through line by line, so I don't intend to go through a line by line introduction of a lot of these items, as you're familiar with a number of them as they're recurring, and we'd be here for a very long time if I did that. But I do intend to hit some of the highlights this evening for you. Alicia will follow up then with some potential deferrals, following up on the request from council last week, given the potential gap on the operating side of the budget. So you'll have a sense of what some potentially deferrable items that I first introduce, you'll get a sense of what might be deferrable based on whatever the requirement is on the operating side going forward. And I think the purpose of tonight is also just to have a good conversation with council so that you have a comfort level of what's proposed to be contained in the capital budget and any discussion that you may wish to have. So I'll kind of roll right into it, and I think you can see it on the screen there as well, and you have it on in your package material. First of all, with the corporate services items, most of those items are recurring that you're familiar with in terms of work that's the work that is kind of recurring to take care of our IT systems. I will highlight down at the bottom of that page that the HR talent management line item, which was an item that was taken out of the 2020 capital budget, given some of the financial challenges we had with COVID. So that was budgeted for 2020. It was removed, and a portion of that is now proposed to be restored as part of the 21 budget. So just so you're aware, that would bring back a project that had to be deferred given some of the COVID challenges. So on the corporate side, about $1 million set aside overall for projects related to generally IT and HR related capital. Then on the next series
Excuse
of
me,
pages,
Ken.
yes,
We have a question from
Absolutely.
Councilor Grandy.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, just a question as I look at the capital budget. I know when we create ours in my workplace, we have to not only submit that, but we have to explain any additional operational costs that would be associated or savings. I'm wondering, because of this corporate initiatives that are here, and they're all good ones, don't get me wrong. We talk about the HR talent management, time tracking, and I don't want to get into a full conversation, Ken. That's not what I'm after, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if there's any way, and you may not have that information, talk about, when you implement these systems as we do, we're looking at savings in HR, we're looking at savings, just a touch up, and maybe that's for another time. I'm not sure if that's possible, but I'm looking at CAO as well. Certainly be nice as we go through and some of these objectives, specifically on the corporate side and stuff, to say, look, that looks like when we implement this package component, we're looking at savings on process, or we're looking at savings here or there. So, and consideration of that. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, that's an important question. And just for council's benefit, along with the lines that you see here this evening, there are business cases that get submitted through to finance. So a lot of that information is contained within the business cases. So the program managers would be able to give you much more fulsome description. I think it's fair to ask those questions, and they can talk through what operating impacts there might be and all of that kind of thing. So it's not part of your package this evening, but it is information that is part of the budget process. So I think we could certainly answer those questions as council has them. So, so on the engineering side, as I said, I'm just going to hit highlights in terms of renewal. A significant number of major renewal projects that are identified there. Council's familiar with a number of them. So Regent Street reconstruction, a phase 1 proposed for 2021, and you'll recall some conversation in 2020 about construction in the Regent Street area due to the impacts of COVID. So work didn't happen this year. So bringing that project back. Further work on Brookside. So that's phase 2 of the work that's been going on in Brookside. A Union Street reconstruction project kind of in the vicinity of Carlton Park, which is related to disaster mitigation funding. So trying not only to improve the street infrastructure there, but also to reduce the impacts of the transportation system associated with flooding. There's a significant project proposed on Rookwood Avenue, first phase, and including a roundabout at Rookwood Avenue and Wagner's Lane that's listed there, and also further work on St. Mary's Street. So those are kind of the large renewal projects that are identified, and I can take a break if you'd like. Yep.
Councilor Grandy.
Yeah, my question becomes, I don't think anybody would understand, and I would rather have an answer tonight, what investigation and design means. Engineering and transportation, I'd like to know what those are heavy costs. So I'd like to at least understand what's implied in that. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, I think Dylan's on the line, or Sean, and they can deal with that at whatever appropriate moment in terms of talking through that.
Councilor, do you want them?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. You want me to jump in right now?
Dylan, please do.
Yeah, the engineering investigation and design is for doing design and investigation work for the next year's work. So if we're going to be looking at money that we have in the budget for 2021, it's for 2022 projects.
Councilor Malay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the renewals project, there, can you not? Sorry, I'll get closer. On the renewal projects, are those the total amount of those phases, or is that our share? Is there some federal, provincial money attached to those projects? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, there's a combination. So no, it is not the total cost of the project. There's water and sewer components to the projects. There's potential provincial funding to the projects, and curb sidewalk work is held under curb and sidewalk renewal for most of these projects, and same thing with surface asphalt. So this is just the rebuild component of the project.
Right, thank you. Could we just have a list, and I don't need tonight, just of the projects that were in it alone that we wouldn't have any provincial or federal money attached to it? Thank you.
Okay, I'll keep going. So on the new side, you'll notice a couple of significant items there that I will mention. You'll see $1.4 million identified for Officer Square. I'd remind council that that would restore the $1 million in funding that was deferred out of the 2020 capital budget to essentially go over to the operating side to deal with COVID. And then the $400,000 that was originally in the 5-year plan for 2021. So that basically restores the 2020 funding and then funds the 2021 contribution that was in the 5-year capital budget. In terms of Campbell Creek, there's $200,000 there for dam removal. That's a project that council is familiar with. And as well, $150,000 to start work on the Carlton Bridge pier abutment project, which is a public open space project where the old Carlton Street Bridge piers hit kind of land on the north side of the river. So I'll park again here. I think there's a couple of questions.
Thank you. Councillor Chase, please.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. And on, excuse me, on that, the Carlton Street Bridge abutment project, there's also a reference to deferring, some other funding. I don't know if we can wait until that comes up or get an explanation now why some is proposed for being done in 2021 and some of it, that project deferred. Why not do the whole thing?
Yeah, maybe it might be best to maybe talk about that after we go through the deferral list, because that's one item that has been identified for deferral. And then we can give you a more fulsome description of what that project looks like. It's just remind council, because you haven't seen that one in a while, it has a long-standing connection to the Union Street secondary plan and also the North Riverfront Trail. But we can get into a deeper conversation about that.
Councillor Grandy.
Yeah, my question's on Officer Square. We're reserving $1.4 million for it this year, and then we delayed it. Not seeing a vision of where any resolution is going to come with that. Has there any been practical sense of what kind of allocation that we should be giving? I mean, we're giving 1.4, but that may not be resolved for 6 months or so. Is there any talk about that with staff at all about that? Because I mean, that impacts actually, the budget. So yeah, you can reserve 1.4, but I'm a little concerned that we're not taking into account that and actually giving a proper number to council saying, you know what, we're probably only going to get half of that done because of the issues we're facing.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think that's kind of telegraphed with the next piece that Alicia is going to run through, which it's been identified on a potential deferral list. So I think we share council's concern that it's unlikely that work would all progress in 2021. So on the one hand, it's kind of good to have the funding in hand such that we have the capacity, we have the resources to finish the process or the project. But I think you're quite right that given the track we're on in terms of timing, there would not be an immediate need for all of that funding in 2021. I thought Councillor Dara.
I did, but Ken, you told me to wait, so I wanted a description of.
I did.
Well, he basically did because I wanted a description of what the Carlton Bridge pier abutment story is. I don't know what it is, so I'll wait. Thank you.
All right, sure.
No further questions, Ken. Why don't you continue?
Okay, good. I'll go to the next page. On the renewal side, and Dylan kind of helped provide some context there a few minutes ago, that there are large items with respect to resurfacing, curb and gutter renewal, sidewalk renewal, storm sewer renewal. Those large, it's important for council to kind of understand that some of the monies in those lines connect to some of those other larger projects that were identified on the previous page. So in other words, in order to complete the Regent Street project, for example, there's money taken from a variety of different lines, including these lines. So these are large items that kind of deal with day-to-day resurfacing and renewal, but also are connected in ways to larger projects as well. So I think that's important context. I did want to highlight downtown public realm upgrades there, $400,000 set aside for 2021. That also connects to some of the projects we're doing in the downtown core like Regent Street, but is how we will start to renew that very old end-of-life public realm infrastructure in the downtown core. So I think council gets a number of comments from the public about the current state of that infrastructure in the downtown, the brickwork, the sidewalk, kind of where it's at in terms of its lifespan. So this will help to get some of the work done on some of the blocks in the downtown to move to the new public realm standards that were approved as part of the city center plan. Just on the non-tangible side, there were a couple of lines.
Ken, we have a
sure.
question from
Sorry.
Councilor Dare before you proceed.
I just wanted some clarification on a question that Councilor Millet asked. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. When he asked, did you ask for a list of the projects and what each project's going to cost? Councilor Millet opposed to having it laid out the way it is here, where Regent Street's at 600,000, but we've got asphalt resurfacing at 2.5 mil and then stormwater at 2 mil. Is that what you were asking? Because sometimes I have a hard time understanding. We see Regent Street at 600 grand, but it does need asphalt, it does need curbing. So I just want to know what the total project costs. Is that going to be explained later this evening as well?
Mr. Chairman, it wouldn't be explained this evening, although Dylan may in cyberspace be able to provide some additional comment on that, because I think, yeah, for you to get a kind of an all-in sense of some of these projects, it would come from, there's amounts coming from the water and sewer side as well as the renewal side. And so you'd need to get an all-in sense, you'd need to bring those numbers all together. So
Yeah, for me, I don't know if anybody else feels the same way. I need to know what the project costs themselves as well, like per project, just so I understand. Yeah, just more. Yeah, thank you. That's perfect wording. Just more transparency on what exactly we're cutting or what we're not cutting, what we're allowing, what we're not allowing, this, that, and the other thing. Thanks.
Yeah. And Councillor Millet, regarding your question, you asked for a list of capital projects that were unencumbered by other levels of funding and other complications. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just in the non-tangible, I think there's a few things there that have been of some interest to council, so I wanted to highlight them. There are 3 items there identified in terms of work on the ball field needs assessment. So taking a look at the cricket side and what the needs are in the community going forward, a field house feasibility study, and as well a new recreation and parks master plan. So those are 3 reasonably high profile items kind of on the rec side that are budgeted tentatively for next year. On the next page, most of the renewal items you see there are fairly standard. We're renewing our trail infrastructure, culverts, trees, plantings, playground assets, things like that. I would note in here that there is money set aside in the budget for the Bantam Field that was identified as part of the ball field study. So that would be funded in 2021.
Ken, before you continue on, Councillor Grandy, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair, through you to Ken and whoever. So I look at the old burial ground renewal, $50,000. There's a strategic report coming to us, I believe, from one of the departments on what needs to be done there, restoration and everything else. Is that part of this budget, or is there other implications somewhere?
I think Dylan or Sean would be best able to answer that question. So.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Grandy, there was a budget there was some money in the budget in 2020 where we've done some ground penetrating radar and some other work. This is to do some actual work for next year on whatever comes out of the report for restoration, cleaning up the site, whatever stuff comes out of the report.
So when the report comes in, which I hope will be very extensive, we can expect a proposed budget figure for 2022. Am I correct?
The money that we're planning on putting aside for 2021 will start the work. And if there's money, we have it continued in the 5-year plan going out as well. We just don't know the full quantity at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Ken. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rogers, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Ken, maybe you're about to get to it, or maybe you mentioned it, but I had my sports off. The outdoor sport court and field renewal. What is an outdoor sport court?
Yeah, that's kind of old terminology. I think Dylan would probably be best place to talk through what are in those individual lines. In particular, the Bantam Field comes into the discussion in those lines, but there may be other things that Dylan could provide further context on.
I assume
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that 250 for outdoor sports court and field renewal, it is for the renewal portion of Marysville back to create the Bantam Field. And you see down in the new area, the outdoor sports court field new is the new portion for the same field. So it's a $500,000 project where half of it is renewal and half is new.
Still, what is a sport court? I'm just curious. I'm not familiar with that terminology.
The
Yeah,
outdoor
it's really
sport court,
Go ahead, Dylan.
oh, no, I was just gonna say outdoor sport court could be basketball, could be tennis, and field would be the ball field, soccer fields. It was just something to capture the outdoor sporting uses.
Okay, so I'm trying to visualize. So the field renewal is the field part and this outdoor sport court is add-ons, additions or enhancements in addition to the ball field, yes?
Well, not quite. So one's referring to fields, so things that are kind of grass based on a field. The courts are more like the asphalt basketball courts, the asphalt tennis surfaces, things like that. So just a differentiation between what we consider a court and what we consider a field, but they're lumped into the same budget item.
But are they all in the same area? Is the outdoor sport courts in other areas?
Yeah, they would be spread throughout the city.
Throughout the city,
And
okay.
I don't know, Dylan would need to comment on whether, although that line item brings in fields and courts, there may or may not be actual courts on the list for this year. There's definitely fields because we know about Bantam, the Bantam baseball field. I'm not sure if there's any work happening to the court infrastructure in 2021. So Dylan may be able to comment on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, now this budget here it's labeled as courts and fields. It is fully taken up with the Bantam Field work we plan for next year. So it's all on the Bantam Field work
Okay, and I
related
don't
to
mean to
the
be
ball field use.
too granular. It says it's a council priority. So I figured if it's one of our priorities, we should have a clear understanding of what it is. So that was why I asked for clarity. Yes.
Thank you for that, Councillor Rogers.
Yes.
Before we continue on, I have a question from Dan Keenan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through to Dylan, if I could. Dylan, the Bantam ball field, we lost a field when they built Bliss Carmen. Are we assuming any funding from the province to assist with this rebuild?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not with this one here, no.
No? Okay. All right. Okay. Any reason, are we contemplating another field at some point? Is that what you're kind of alluding to, or do we know?
Mr. Chair, as part of the ball field needs assessment, there was discussion of creating a fourplex. So that's something that's to be looked at in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll just jump back up the list for a second there because I didn't get a chance to mention a fairly significant amount of money for park plan implementation. There is $1 million shown for the implementation of the 4 major park plans there. And there's more detail, obviously, in terms of what the scope of that work is that we can provide, but that's a significant investment in the implementation of the park plans. And I think there was a question.
Councillor Millet.
Thank you. Just wondering in what line item with park implementation that don't fall under the 4 large park plans, where would that fall?
Dylan, do you have that?
Can you repeat the question, Councillor Millet?
In what line item, if any, with the implementation of park plans that don't fall under the 4 large ones? I'm thinking Morning Gate area and the Leanne Valcourt area. What line item would that fall under?
Mr. Chair, we're using the same line item for all of them. So we have $1 million for the park plans. I'm trying to grab my list here to see exactly what we had for next year. There was trail work in both of the Leanne and Morning Gate parks, and plans on doing design work for a playground for the next year in the Morning Gate Park. That's in the design section. Also, to tie into the roundabout we were planning at Brookwood and Wagner's, there was a moving into the park in Odell and starting the parking lot and moving up in through there. And
Yeah, it's
so
just
I guess to answer the question, it's all tied into the
it's
same budget.
because Wilmot, Carlton, Odell, and Killarney was in the title. I just thought it kind of threw me off a little bit. And then, if I may, Mr. Chair, the outdoor sports court and field new, what does that counter?
Yeah, I think that's what Dylan had commented earlier. I think that's tied exclusively to the Bantam ball field, but I'll make sure I got that right from Dylan.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, next line item, outdoor recreation infrastructure.
Dylan, you've got that?
Yeah, I'm looking
Looking
at
it
my
up.
list here. 450. Apologize, I got a couple lists here in front of myself. Oh, that, Mr. Chair, is beach volleyball courts at Willie O'Ree and pickleball at Nassau Middle School.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question to Ken or Dylan, as the case may be. The park plan implementation there, it notes 4 parks, and you've just noted that it also includes 2 of the neighborhood parks in that. We have waited a long time, for all of these parks, not just the 2 neighborhood parks, Lee and Valcourt and Morningate, but also Wilmot, Carleton, Odell, and Killarney. My question is $1 million won't go that far. Like, I'd like to get an idea of just, how that figure was arrived at. And, if you want to come back to me later, with an answer to that question, that's fine. But I think we should have an understanding that, these are major initiatives, particularly the larger parks. Odell and Killarney, for 2. And I'd like to get a sense of how that $1 million figure was arrived at and how it would be allocated among the parks. So that's one question. The other is, it seems to me that there was funding set aside in 2020 for the 2 neighborhood parks that may not be used, just due to the lateness. They've just been, RFP went out for tendering on those parks. So I'd like to get a sense of how much funding remains from the 2020 budget that would be carried over into those parks as well, to supplement whatever piece of the $1 million that is indicated here.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think those are both good questions. I'll maybe deal with the second one first because it's fresher in my mind. Where we have work underway, if it ends up straddling kind of the end of year, that amount would be reserved for the following year. So that money isn't lost. It's basically held in reserve to complete the work that began in 2020. So that money basically gets rolled into 2021 along with the new money. So that's typically the way that functions. In terms of the $1 million in new resources, I think from the staff side, the comment I would give is these are actually significantly larger numbers than we have historically been allocating towards the parks. And we've over time been kind of introducing new investment in those areas as our budgets allow to start to get to work on those park plans. But as council will know, the amount that we have available for new projects is reasonably limited because how we allocate the budget between renewal and new. So there is only so much new money to go around, and we have been trying to carve out a larger piece of that new money, that new infrastructure money for parks to get substantive progress on the work in those parks. So I think the point is well taken that there is a significant backlog and there will be a significant amount of investment required over the next number of years. We've been trying to carve out more funding to deal with that as our resources allow.
Thank you, Ken. Councillor Rogers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go back. First of all, I want to preface all this was I'm in support of recreational funding. I would like a clearer sense, though, because I think we may be asked, the outdoor sporting court and field renewal versus new. I guess I was understanding the renewal to be the work that's being done in the Bantam field, is that what we're calling it? But now I'm hearing that's the new. So Dylan, I'm just wondering, can you just detail what is included in the renewal and then what the new money is going towards, just so we have a sense, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So there's already an existing field there now. So there's going to be a renewal portion of that with some fencing work, some grading work in the actual field. There's also lighting work that has to be renewed and added, and some lighting work that has to be added in. So breaking down the cost of the project, there was about half that was renewal of existing stuff and half adding in new stuff. So that's where it was breaking down. Overall, the project is about a $500,000 project. and half is replacing some stuff that's already there on our asset listing, and half is not.
So that's what field work costs, eh? It's that much money. Wow. I wouldn't have thought that. Thank you.
Councilor McGarity, please.
Dylan, back to the park plan implementation. Can you tell us, you told us a little bit about Walmart, what to be expected there in the new parks, but what work will be carried on with the balance of the money in Carlton, Odell, and Killarney?
So what the plan is for 2021, as you know, we have Union Street, which is tied to the DMAF fund, the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Funding. On Carlton and next to Carlton, we plan on doing the Union Street, the trail, and the work on the Great Lawn. Is a lot of people know that the grading work over in Carlton has some wetness issues, I guess, in there. So that was one of the first items that came up in the actual park plans, and also tied in the Odell parking lot. So just to let council know that there is a long-term vision. These are 25-year plans, but there is a vision to actually get a lot of this stuff implemented fairly quickly, high impact stuff. So, and maybe I'll just allude to a couple things in some further years just to let you know that there is actually a vision there where, in 2022, the lower parking lot and the riparian zone is planned in Carlton Park, along with the stepping stone courtyard in Wilmot and some gateway signage and some of the disc golf up in Odell, and also the play structure up in High Point, and then also the some work of the play structure in Killarney and the Killarney Boardwalk in 2023. So there is some major work planned. It's just not all going to happen at once.
Yep. All right, I was going to move on to fleet then. There's a large list there of items that are identified for renewal, which is our normal course of replacing equipment as it starts to reach end of life and maintenance costs start to increase associated with those assets. So I did point out to council, there's about $2.8 million worth of investments there on the fleet side. And Councillor Price, I think.
Councilor Price, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ken, I have to ask you to give me a little description, please, of the $140,000 ice machine. That one's really jumping out at me.
I'm going to let, I have a thought of what it is, but I'll get Dylan probably to provide the definitive answer there.
Yeah, the technical term, I guess, Mr. Chair, is a Zamboni.
Thank you.
Councilor Grandy?
Yeah, for maybe to bring back at some point, I'm not tonight or maybe near future, but I'd like to have an idea from Fleet, how they, and maybe this is transportation where it fits under the realm. I'd like to report back that, well, anyway, I think we should look at how they do their fleet write-offs, what their projections are and how they account for write-offs on their fleet. I'm looking at the bucket truck here and a few other things, and I'd really like to know and understand these items. Some of these items don't move a lot, yet they're being replaced, and I'm just not sure. I'd like to understand that from a fleet point of view of how things are written off and their ages and everything. Thanks.
Excellent question, Councillor. It's been a number of years since we've had a presentation about fleet resources and allocations at Finance and Admin. It's a good point to bring forward. Councillor Millet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the bus renewal, I'm just wondering, because when we first got on council, so 4 years ago, we bought a few buses, and that was the end of the renewal. Are we starting a new cycle of that we'll need to buy buses yearly? Everything? That's question number one.
I'll go to Dylan on that one as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'll have to check if it's going to be an annual investment, because we did buy a few back there, but we are starting to get into some that are aging quite a bit.
And I guess a follow-up question on that, because I know the discussion that we had back then, because we had a lot of money from the feds to help buy those buses. So it's kind of, well, we're buying those buses, but we're not happy about it. So I know there's discussion about electric hybrid buses at the time. Just wondering if there's, and I don't need an answer tonight, if there's been any discussions around that. And I know there's some costs associated with that, but I think that's important to some councillors and some citizens. So that's one. And two, I know there's there's buckets of money from FCM, the feds, when it comes to transportation and stuff like that. Are we getting any help on that bus, or are we going in alone?
I might just start on that one by saying there are some federal funding sources that we've been working through. I don't think we have anything, absolutely committed to this point, but we are investigating the opportunity to have third-party support for some of those investments.
Thank you.
All right, on the building services
Sorry,
side.
Ken, before we start, Mayor O'Brien has a question as well.
My question was on the bus. And I would like to know if we were anticipating, regardless of potential federal contribution, if we were anticipating a electric bus or a hybrid bus or because I know one of the discussions, as Councillor Malay alluded to, was the fact we had to buy, we had this money and it would have been silly not to use it several years ago. We weren't quite ready for electric or hybrid, but we acknowledged that the time would come for that. So I wonder if this one is anticipating a different kind of bus, regardless of the funds that we're getting.
Yeah,
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay, he's there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Through you, Mr. Chair. No, this is a regular bus. It is not a hybrid or electric. We are still investigating that every year to see if the technology is where we view it should be to make it viable. Right now, an electric bus is running well over $1 million. The hybrids are high, but a lot of cities that went and received in the states that received federal funding in the past to move to hybrid are actually replacing back with diesel again because of the issues with some of them. Not saying that that's going to be the way of the future, and obviously things are moving in the way of electric, but don't think it's there right yet.
Okay, thanks.
All right, on the building services side, there's just a couple that I'll probably just point out to council. There is a significant amount that's set aside in 2021, which would be followed by future investments in future budget years for a deep retrofit of City Hall. That's a much larger project that would take us a number of years to kind of accumulate resources in order to execute. But that is a significant item that's listed for 2021. Most of the other items there are all fairly standard renewal items associated with various assets we have, including the Playhouse, the Two Nations Fire Station, the indoor pool, the police station, and other buildings, including our parking garages. Not a significant amount of investment on the new side in building services next year, so largely renewal projects attached to existing assets. Just kind of wrapping up then on the engineering and operations side, there is an amount set aside for a fixed route analysis of the transit system, following up from the recommendations of the transit study. And then continued investments in terms of renewing our parking infrastructure, which is largely at end of life, and making the transit system more accessible. And that is connected to work that we've done on the fleet side to make our fleet more accessible, making sure that the bus stops and the shelters are also accessible.
Councillor Dara.
Quickly, just go back. The retrofit for City Hall, I'd like to be able to explain why I'm approving $500,000 for a retrofit of City Hall.
And I'll go to Dylan on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. What it is, same like we had it in the budget last year. It was $500,000. We're same as what we've been doing for Officer Square. We were trying to build up a pot for a larger project at City Hall. Since the infrastructure is beginning to fail there, and we know we're going to have a large project in the future.
No other details?
Mr. Chair, not sure what details you're looking for. Maybe that it's the HVAC system, the electrical system, just the infrastructure is getting old and inefficient and not working very well.
That works for me. Thanks.
All right, now I know what it feels like to be in Ward 1, I guess. So on the planning side, there were just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight for you there. As council is aware, those of you that were at the development committee meeting, in the plan development side, there's really two projects that would come from that $250,000 line item. One is the housing needs assessment and affordable housing strategy that was discussed at the last development committee meeting. And then also the initial investment in what will be ultimately the new South Core plan. So that will be the next generation of the town plat plan, using the new municipal plan terminology to kind of guide land use and development for the area, basically from George Street back to Connaught Street on the town plat. So that's a plan that is obviously largely implemented, given the significant amount of development that's happened in that area of the city.
Councilor McDermott.
Thanks. Through you, Mr. Chair. Plan development, could you just repeat the first part that you talked about?
Oh, yeah. So the first part would be the housing needs assessment, affordable housing strategy. Okay. So there, monies in that line item would be used to fund the housing needs assessment, affordable housing strategy work, and it would also go towards the South Core plan work. So the money would essentially get divided between those projects to get the work done on those projects.
Okay. And thanks on that. Look, I guess one of the things, and I don't want to, like with a lot of stuff, I don't want to get down into the weeds on this. But in regards to that housing, it's related to the affordable housing. A big component of affordable housing when we're talking about market rates and that sort of stuff is about supply. And one of the issues that I think we all recognize that we're facing in the province, and Fredericton is especially acute, is a very, very low vacancy rate. One of the things that I'd be curious, and I don't know if this is what you're looking, what will be part of this is, in order to ease that pressure, we need to get more multi-unit buildings and more of those units online added to the supply. Do we know how many we need, or is that going to be part of the assessment? The reason I ask this is, every year we have, at least recently, we've had remarkable numbers of starts on these units. And I look at, say, 600 units, and I think that's great, but is that really just only keeping up with immigration? Is it addressing that longer? So is that going to be a component of that study, so that we can know that, hey, we need 1,400 units a year if we're going to? Okay.
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Mr. Chairman. So I think where I'd start with that is that, council will recall all the discussion we had with Imagine Fredericton, and there were population projections that we had prepared as part of that I think caught the community by surprise, thinking that, really, is the city going to grow by as much as kind of some of the numbers that Imagine Fredericton indicated? And I think what the community is quickly learning is that, yes, in fact, the community is growing as predicted. And so we're seeing that in the development pressure now, which we all foresaw. We tried to get the municipal plan in place in front of that to start to make sure that we had enough land and inventory. We're seeing significant development. I just saw the numbers earlier today. We're at over 530 new units so far in 2020. Yet we know that, that's not enough to meet demand. So I think the pivot there to your question is the housing needs assessment is a very important component going forward, so that we understand the market at a more detailed level. And I think that's important for council to make land use decisions, to make sure that you're making appropriate decisions about the use of land. But it's also very instructive to the development community to make sure that they have a good feel for, what the depth of the market is for various types of product, to make sure that they try and meet those needs and gaps in the community. So I think we're convinced that housing needs assessment will have tremendous value for us going forward from a regulatory perspective, but also to help make sure the development community knows how best to respond to those growth pressures.
Councilor Grandi.
But I think you've explained that very well, and thank you. And if you were development committee, you would have heard what this whole strategy is about and this plan. But I think you raised a good point, Councilor McDermott, and I think one of the things we should be looking at is the actual projection of the number of units based on on immigration based on population growth, looking, having some kind of baseline on that so that we understand after we get that report and we understand what's going to require. Because right now, when you go to put when a developer comes in and they're putting up a number of units, let's say it's a 24, 48 or higher, majority of the time before they even hit the ground, they're rented. So that means the demand is so high. So, yep, it's a good thought about what is it we need on a number of units to try to make it, go forward.
My apologies. Councillor Rogers.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I'll just add to that, and I know we don't like to get too deep in at this level, but as part of that discussion, it isn't so much what we need, it's how many do we need to then get to a healthy vacancy rate, which we know to be about 4%. And it isn't until we're at that 4%, that seems to be the magic number, where then the market takes care of itself in that the older stock becomes more affordable. So the fact that if we're 1 to 1.5%, this idea that maybe we're just meeting need, it's still, that's only for new builds, which are often more expensive, higher end. We need to get to the 4%. That's the magic number to free up the older building stock, because that, by the very nature of the market, it becomes more affordable. So I think this needs assessment will uncover how many do we need, but also how many do we need to get to that sweet spot.
Yeah, and just maybe before I move on, I just bring it back to the South Core Plan as well, because I think what council is obviously seeing kind of meeting by meeting is how demand has shifted. There is still good, healthy suburban demand, but there is also undeniable demand in the urban core, and making sure we have up-to-date planning documents to allow us to deal with those growth pressures in the urban core are really critical, because, that's where we see a lot of pressure. And I guess, the way I explain it to people is, unlike Moncton and St. John in particular, we have very low land availability in the core compared to other New Brunswick cities, and that creates land use conflict and challenge, which, is an issue in Fredericton.
Councillor McDermott.
And if I could just close that up and look, with it belaboring this, I think that's that's a big part of my point and question that I'm asking. It goes beyond just a city issue, though, right? I mean, this is going to color how we're addressing the province when it comes to the additional commercial taxation on those units, which is really precluding any company from outside of New Brunswick doing business here, because why would they? And so I think that's going to be an important part of how we lobby the province as well. So,
excellent point. Thank you. Ken?
Okay, well, I'm going to deal with page 8 in the package, which is the public safety line items there. Significant, each year to renew a lot of those important pieces of equipment that both police and fire do to keep us all safe. So you'll see a series of line items there that intend to do just that, to make sure that the police officers and the firefighters have the equipment they need to do their job safely. So those are indicated on page 8. And then I just close on page 9 with the items put forward in the Recreation, Culture, Community Engagement Department, most of which are kind of typical renewal items dealing with things like signage and digital media that we renew on a yearly basis. I will point out those continued investments in both public art and the implementation of the culture plan. And I think, council is well aware of kind of the fruits of some of those investments with some of the things that have happened in the city in terms of development of additional public art assets and also cultural amenities. So with that, Mr. Chairman, so the budget that you see before you that I've just talked through represents a $22.7 million capital budget that's proposed for 2021. If there's no further questions on the content of this, I will turn it over to Alicia then, who will deal with the questions council had last year about certain items that may be have potential for deferral based on requirements on the operating side.
Councillor Millet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just because I know it's a small amount for the discussion we've had tonight, but the signage, I don't know if it's signage that I'm talking about, but I'm just thinking it's probably a question for Dylan. On the stop signs and those type of signs renewal, How are we doing on the bilingual updates?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for the stop signs, I believe we have this year and next year to complete.
Perfect. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, Alicia, would you like to enter Ward 1 and deliver your presentation?
The fumes might make me a little squirrely. So per last Monday night, we did hear that to deal with the then $3.1 million deficit that we were anticipating, that capital deferral or cuts and or other options could be available. So before you, we have a list that staff created based on a few different criteria. So some of those criteria involved whether or not they did have additional funding. Sorry, Councilor Brady. If there were any other projects tied to it, such as a water and sewer project, if they were tied to our regular operating budget, so if it was renewal of items that were very old and required a lot of maintenance to keep them up, as well as some of our funding for our capital projects that are actually run by city staff, we recoup that money from capital. So if we cut some of those projects that those staff typically work on, it would also have a negative impact on our budget. I think Councillor McGarity has a question.
Councillor McGarity, please.
Not to let you go too far, but before this was done, we just get notified that we get over $600,000 from the transit budget from the federal government finally come through the province. Rumor has it that there's probably more money coming from the province than the feds. So maybe, and I know you get over 3.5 million in cuts here, so maybe we might be too preemptive on making those cuts, and maybe it might cut short the conversation if we just deferred that until we really know what's coming down from, if there are.
That's going to be part of the conversation we're having presently. So,
through you, Mr. Chair, we did get notified on Friday that we were getting some transit funding. We're still trying to determine exactly which amount of money we may need for 2020 to balance the budget, and any opportunity to carry that money forward. In addition to that, if there is new money coming forward, obviously what we would do if we did get a balanced budget through some of these cuts is we would replace these projects as that funding came in. Ideally, we might not be able to wait long enough till we get some of those answers, just because some of them will take a while to come back. But as soon as we do find out about that funding, we would bring it back to council and be able to add back some of these projects that we've deferred to a future year.
Okay.
So if you want, I will run down through and just give you kind of an idea on why we potentially recommended some of these projects. So the HR talent management project, it is a personnel information management system. It did get deferred in 2020. It is something that could get deferred again, just because the resourcing required to do that could be pretty significant considering the current climate that we're already in. Staff are pulled in a bunch of different directions, so it could give us a little flexibility there to defer that to a future year. The discussion on Officer Square is just that. We do have money in reserves that would likely cover the cost of what we intend to do there in 2021. So this could be deferred again, and the project could literally stay on track the way it is now.
Councilor McDermott.
Thank you. Look, I hate to say it, but Officer Square, we've been doing this for a long time. And I'm actually not sure where we are right now in terms of phasing and the projection of when we'll be complete. And I'm sorry for being somewhat flip in that question, but it's a very slow process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would agree with you. And it is a slow process, and we have been setting funding aside to address that. And due to some of the delays, that funding is just sitting there. So ideally, we could use some of that reserve funding, and it would not slow anything down further.
I guess really my question was when I think that we started this, in 2017, approximately, it was around 2017 that we got through the whole planning phase and got into construction and that sort of thing, if I'm correct, if my memory serves me. And originally I thought we would be done by 2021, 2022 at the very latest. Obviously those timelines aren't there. So really what my question was, what are we looking at for an end date now? If in a perfect world.
Sean, do you have an answer for us?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think what we're looking at now is probably a 2022, 2023. There have been a number of challenges as we've been going forward, and the intention, we do have kind of positive momentum and we are moving it forward. Our next steps is to go into consultation, and as we do that, then that will open up what our work will be in 2021 and 2022. And I think overall what we've discussed is coming back to council to walk through kind of the details of that as we go forward as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Sean. I have Councillor Mallet and McGarity, then Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sean, don't go too far. That might not be a question for him, actually. Like that Councillor McGarry brought up the planning and also the public engagement started in 2017 that we started with. So we have money in reserve for that project. I'm just wondering, now that those dates are adding on, obviously there's a cost for those delays. So I'm wondering, right, obviously it's not, we won't get the answer tonight, but I wonder if we can get an update, one, where we are on the project and what's left to do. And then what are we looking at as extra costs with inflation and whatnot, and as time keeps piling up? Thank you.
Noted. Councillor McGarity, then Chase.
The 1.4 million, is that borrow money? Because I thought we would, out of that $9 million earmarked for Officer Squares. So we have that reserved.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we had never planned to borrow for that. The intention was that it was staggered over a few years so that we would build up enough funding to be able to complete that project on city resources. So this would just be a continuation of that staggering. And yes, no borrowing included in that.
So yeah, I was just under the impression that at the time it was a $9 million project and that we would use some of our debt room. So, but that's good. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to touch on the field house feasibility study. Well, perhaps maybe we should let Alicia complete the list, and then I'd be happy. Then I'd be happy to come back to the field house.
Why don't you ask your question? There may be more questions moving forward. We've been proceeding in a interrupting sort of way this evening, but I think it does work best and it gets the question when it's fresh in your mind. So
okay,
go ahead, please.
Okay, well, I'll be able to remember it if I say it now. So my question is, these two questions here really. I mean, these are deferrals, they're not cuts. They are deferrals. So what we're trying to deal with in large measure is the loss of revenue due to COVID-19 in 2020, and maybe anticipating some loss of revenue in 2021, same reason. And that these are deferrals, they're not cuts, and I'm okay with that. But some of the needs that, we speak of, Fredericton is a rapidly growing city. There are some, major needs, throughout our domain. whether it's roadways or whether it's in the recreational facilities. And so this, what I question is, the question I raised last week was, we have some funding set aside for the Performing Arts Center, or at least, our intention to borrow, for that. So my question last week was, why we don't, in some of these topics, like say, the Fieldhouse feasibility study, which would help address a very pressing demand, I submit. Why we don't use some of that debt room that we might otherwise have used for Performing Arts Center that, is, still well over the horizon.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That $3 million, $3.25 million amount of debt room availability is what actually supplements this capital budget. So if we didn't have that debt room included in that $22 million total, we would only have about $18.5 million within our capital budget to do that. So we do include that debt room to supplement and do some of these one-time projects.
Well, that's good because, these 2 years, 2020 and 2021 are, let's say, unusual, at least in terms of lost revenue. So we have to be able to deal with it. But I do question, since the chair has told me to use this time wisely, questioning the deferral of the Fieldhouse study. Who can explain that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The list that we're showing you is one that staff talked about. It's certainly up to council what you wish to do. The reductions that you see are beyond what we require. So tonight is about getting some feedback to what staff has put forth. And if there's options and priorities of council that may have been deferred or recommended to be deferred by staff, is certainly your prerogative to tell us that. And we can go back and look at the numbers. But as you can see, the number of reduction is beyond what we need. But we felt that going through them that they all kind of met some criteria that we could rationalize in our own heads that made sense not doing this year, but not cutting them, but deferring them. So we're looking for some reaction tonight from you folks to what we put forth.
And I might add on top of that, tonight, this represents what we need to do to balance our budget moving forward. But as Councilor McGarity pointed out, in the fullness of time, this is also going to be our shopping list for taking things off the deferral list. So if you don't feel like making an impassioned argument tonight to pull something off this list, there'll be time in the future to do that, hopefully as other levels of government funding kick in to account for COVID, or if the city has any other revenue, I hesitate to use the word surpluses, but that would cause it as well. I have Councillors Melee, then Grandy, then Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like the CEO mentioned, they're looking for reaction, so I'll give you mine on topic that was just brought up. And like you said, this is not just deferral list, it's a potential list of deferral because the amount is larger than what we need to find, and there could be some funds coming in at a later date. But I do question the Fieldhouse feasibility study and even the rec and park master plans that are pretty important part. I think what COVID really showed us is that we do have a weakness when it comes to recreational infrastructure. I think it's something that we need to look at. I feel every day there's another article in the media that talks about a group that just can't find what they need and that they're growing. And right, you start with pickleball, going to volleyball, and a lot of sports. So I think if we just keep pushing that the road, because it's not like we're going to do the project next year, but I think it's really important for us to get the ball rolling. And you're talking a pretty small amount of dollar to get that ball rolling that's going to affect thousands and thousands of citizens in a positive way. So those are two projects that I'd like to see stay in the 2021 budget if possible. And on that question, because I'm sure each councillor's round table have their own preference, and because the list is larger than what we need to find, I'm just wondering the process that we're going to use to come to the amount that we need to find? That'd be a question for you, I guess, Mr. Chair.
Perhaps, but I'm going to ask Alicia to answer it for me.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so essentially what we put forward is things that as staff we could live with not doing, knowing that they're all painful choices. There's nothing easy on here that staff would recommend that we not move forward. We are looking for approximately $3.1 million, less whatever funding can be used from other levels of government. So if there is anything that's near and dear to council, you can tell us tonight and we'll go back, try and add that back into the budget and balance it when we bring it back through the service-based budgets. So that's basically the process that we'd like to go through. Is we'd like to be able to cut, or sorry, not cut, defer, because it's true deferral. We would like to defer up to $3.1 million. And then as additional funding potentially came through, we could add stuff back.
So if I understood that correctly, we're having discussion, we're throwing our reaction of what we might want to keep it, then staff's gonna try to gauge the pulse of council and then come back with the final report, and then we'll discuss that one and vote on that.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, now on the speakers list, Councillors Grandy, Rogers, and McDermott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You opened the door, Chris, so you want reaction. And my reaction is what I'm surprised at, that nothing on this list was taking into account the challenges that our downtown businesses are going to be under. It's almost like we're talking on this budget that COVID's over. It's almost like that there's no reaction coming up in this coming year. This is a 2 to 3 year issue we're dealing with here. Even if there is a vaccine, which won't happen until probably third quarter of next year, from what I'm understanding when reading articles and media about this. So, and even when that happens, it's going to be a number of months in, and probably a year, or at least a year, before people get confidence in coming together and going back and going at business. I guess my point of view is based on the challenges of where COVID is, and that we know, and if you had to listen to last week's interview with 3 restaurateurs from downtown on the CBC, the challenges are enormous. Some are going to go under, some are going to go out of business. That's how close they are. And I don't understand in this deferral, and almost like engineering just wanted to keep away from any construction, why we didn't take into account the effects of business downtown upon this list as well. And that's personally what I would like to see, is a relook at what affects downtown business, what's going to be the challenge, and what projects deeply affect those downtown businesses that we could defer, not cut, but defer. Because I'll tell you, the long-term financial plan is sound, and you can defer stuff a year or two, and it's not going to hurt our deficits. I was involved in that plan as well as the mayor, finance chair for 4 years. I know how it's structured, and it works well. And I don't understand why some of those projects are not considered in this list. This is no disrespect to staff, you do a great job and everything else, but I want to see what the question should have been asked. Staff looked at it. Yes, it's painful, but what's affecting business downtown, and what are we going to do to do that? So that's what I'd like to see, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Sure. Chris, would you like to take an initial run at that question? And we do have an opportunity, Councillor, through our service-based budgets and through our grants process to also address community needs and interests. Those conversations are still in front of us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A part of tonight is to get comments back. We as staff debrief probably tomorrow, the next day, about the discussion tonight, and tomorrow night if we have a meeting as well. And we take a look at everything and see if we can't come up with something that council can live with. But again, tonight is to hear back from you folks. Ultimately, it is your decision on what goes forth in the capital budget. And so they're all good concerns, and we'll talk about it as staff and see if we can come back with something.
I don't need an answer, Mr. Chair. I just want to give my opinion.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. Excellent points, though. I now have Councillors Rogers and McDermott.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question and then I have a couple of comments. My first question is a bit of a follow-up to Ken's presentation. I'm wondering if we could have a little bit more of an explanation on the Carleton Bridge Pier abutment stabilization. And I know I've been around a while, but I can't quite recall what that is. So, because now that we're taking it off, I'm just wondering if there's any risk, if it's structural work that is timely. I don't know who can. Dylan, hello, where are you? Where are you? We need you.
I'm here. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll start off and then maybe I'll ask Sean to dive in. So there's a couple things here. One of it's not about structural, it's about doing something for the pier to make it more of an attraction. So the reason it's on the deferral list is because there's going to be some consultation that's going to have to happen with St. Mary's, and we weren't sure if the full construction was going to get built out in 2021. That was a reason why a few of these we weren't sure that they were actually going to be able to happen the next year. If you want some more details on the exact design and construction, I'll defer to Sean on that.
No, I mean, that's lots for me. That makes total sense. Okay. And I guess my two comments, I was curious as well that we didn't see any of some of the road work in the downtown being deferred, particularly phase 1 of Regent Street, just knowing the pressure points that any road work causes to the downtown businesses. And I'm thinking that they might have liked a year reprieve after, I know we had last year, but then this year, another year's reprieve. I don't know if it had to do, and then I wondered why we didn't see that and wondered if it had anything to do with the Officer Square work, if we were trying to align that road work on Regent Street with Officer Square. I was trying to recall what year 1 of that work was. So, but that was my first, I was expecting to see that on a deferred list. So when I didn't, I was just curious as to why. So maybe I don't know if anyone's prepared to answer that or if it's just food for thought.
Mr. Chair, I can start and maybe we just take it away. We did discuss these projects at the staff level, at all different levels of staff level, and actually determined that doing the job maybe in 2020 might have actually been the best option. But because of the impacts on the businesses may not have been as great this year because stuff was actually shut down. We viewed that there is a lot of foot traffic in the downtown and didn't view that the road work would cause a huge issue because we actually are having Queen Street open and all around and it's only that one block. But we can obviously take a look at it. There's, we've got a long list of projects that we could renew and we could stay out of the downtown if that is council's wishes, but we also, council wants to push forward the downtown public realm plan and build out some of these plans as well. Officer Square can still happen and some work on Queen Street can still happen without doing Regent. But, obviously staff, we would like to actually do that project because there is a long-term build out of the downtown. But if it is council's wish to not do that project, it's obviously can be put in another area.
Mm-hmm. No. Okay. Thank you for that. And I mean, I understand the being of two minds on that on the one hand, we want to get the downtown work done. I'm just being really sensitive to the downtown businesses, I guess. So, and I know that as is staff, and so I would leave that with you. I think now a couple of us have spoken on it, so we'll leave that with you. I guess my final comment has to do with the recreational line. I think it comes to about $225,000. I think that, between the feasibility study, the master plan, and then the cricket field needs assessment. I think all of that work is important work. I think the cricket field needs assessment is actually amongst the most important work, mainly because I'm thinking of our newcomer population. I'm thinking of having a sports facility that really resonates with that population. We invest in a lot of the sports facilities that we know best, the traditional sports facilities that we've been using for a long time, but I think that as people are moving into our community, we're showing an increasing need for cricket, and I think that we should know where the needs lie, how we can respond to it, so that we can begin factoring it into our recreation planning. So I actually think that study is very important, not just from a recreational perspective, but also from a newcomer attraction, retention, quality of life perspective. So that is a line item that I would like to sort of to rethink in the guise of this is more than just a piece of recreation. It plays into quality of life, and attraction of people that we want coming into our community. But overall, I tend to agree with Councillor Mallet. I think that the recreational planning is important. It's $225,000. If we suddenly realized, oh, we have enough money, that would be money I'd love us to be able to spend in this coming year so we can do some of that planning. However, and this will be my final point, is when I see plans deferred, sometimes I go to a human resource capacity issue, and I was wondering if one of the reasons some of the planning was being deferred is because we've been planned out, and I know that it takes a lot of staff time and resources to work with consultants on plans. I'm wondering if that was a rationale for the deferral, and if it was, I respect that and respect the CAO's thoughts on that. So.
I guess what my reaction would be that wasn't the reason for it. It was something new, and we were trying to make sure the money went to our existing assets as much as possible. So I would say it was not a human resource capacity issue.
Well, given that, then it would be one that I would love to remain on a list if possible, all that 225, in particular, the cricket needs assessment. I think that would be great.
Thank you, Councillor. I now have Councillor McDermott, O'Brien, Keenan, and Price on the speakers list.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Parks and trees, the recreation stuff, I agree. I just agree. Cricket, I think, has been sort of a long time coming, and for all those reasons. So I'm sort of I'm not sort of, I am definitely in support of that. I guess when I look at this list, the 1.5 million for Office Square, we've talked about it. There's uncertainty as to how much, really, from a realistic point of view, how much work. And if I understand that, we have reserves from 2020 that should we be able to work would accommodate that. So I look at that and I think $1.4 million, that's getting us more than halfway to where we want to be. Vacuum truck, that's what they use in water and sewer, I think on the sewer side, is it not? And look, don't get me wrong, I think it's a totally important thing to have, but I think we could probably squeeze one more year out of it. Same thing with the bus. The on-demand study for the parking and transit, and I guess one of my concerns I would have in going forward with that in period is we actually don't have a very good base of users right now. So I wonder, is that study actually even going to be meaningful, right? Like it's one thing to be able to go out to the cricket, to cricket field needs assessment or field house or recreation parks master plan, where we can gather those people in because we know who the stakeholders are and that sort of thing. But when it comes to that on-demand fixed route analysis, I think that it's going to be based on what some of our actual numbers and usage are. So I would think that would be an easily deferrable item. And I think, with most of that stuff, we're almost there. And I'm not going to be the one who says what it is we should and should not be doing. But it seems like we have capital and we have the non-tangible capital. And those non-tangible capital, for the most part, I think are lower cost and will have significant impact if they go ahead. So my preference would be to look at those capital items, whether it's new or renewal, as an area to eliminate.
Thanks, Councillor. Mayor O'Brien, then Councillors Keenan, Price, and Chase.
Wow. Okay. I wasn't going to speak on this because staff put the list together, and I thought we could just ask them to trim a bit more, and Bob's your uncle. But my preference would be eliminate one of the two pieces of equipment, round it off, but balance the budget, and that's it. Thank you.
Councillor Keenan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think Kate's comments and Councillor Grandy around the items that are impacting the downtown, specifically Regent Street Phase 1 and also the public realm. Although, no, I must confess, I don't know a lot of what that public realm includes. But I think tearing up sidewalks right now would be just as devastating to them as tearing up streets. So anything we do there just turns off pedestrians and people coming downtown. So we should stay away from downtown, period, at least for the next year. So my suggestion would be defer both of those. And if you either we, instead of leasing equipment that we need to buy, just buy that equipment outright. That's what we typically do. This is just, deferring the cost. We're still going to get those two pieces of equipment regardless, but I don't think we should be doing either one of those projects next year. And I would be open to comments from Dylan on the public realm and what that includes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So the public realm stuff is what you thought. So it's the surface work. The betterment work, I'd say, on Regent Street and some work on Carlton Street in front of the new building for next year. So again, like I mentioned before, if council wants us to stay away from the downtown, other than maybe some work around Officer Square area, stuff that wouldn't impact business as much, is entirely okay, I guess. As staff, I guess we can talk as a group as well. Prefer to put it back into other projects and have ones that would be less impactful. So we're still hammering away at some new stuff and some renewal stuff, but that could be up for discussion from council as well. Yeah,
I think within the full budget package, and just to reiterate what Councillor Millet and Roger said, I would agree as well on the recreation field house and cricket assessment or needs plans and master plans. I think we can do those and be ready for the next step. And I think they would be good projects to move forward on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keenan. Now I have Councillor Price, Chase, Mallet, and Dare on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things that was said earlier was worse the effect of things that are near and dear to people's heart. Since I became a councillor, this Carlton Street pier abutment job has been on the table. We haven't been able to get it finished. I know that staff have been working with St. Mary's to try and get something to happen there. I'm planning on meeting with either Chief Polchers or the new chief-elect, whoever that happens to be, to get this thing back on track. I don't know if anybody has actually had a good look at this piece of infrastructure, but it's nasty. It's bended, twisted metal, graffiti, trees, roots, right on the bank of the river and right on our north side trail. So I would really like to keep that on the list until until I have a chance to meet with the new chief to see if we can get this back on the table for next summer. I do agree with that we need to spend the money on all of the parks and trees things. I definitely agree that we need to keep excavators away from the downtown, Main Street, Union Street next year. Those businesses have been hit hard enough, and perhaps even as the mayor alluded to, buy the vacuum truck, or Dan alluded to, buy the vacuum truck and postpone the bus until we find out what's going to happen with our ridership post-COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Let's see, Councillor Chase, Mallet, Dare, and McGarity.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question and then I have a comment, but my question pertains to the fixed route analysis, the on-demand study, the fixed route analysis that was identified, $100,000. What is that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a continuation, I guess, of some of the recommendations that came out of the Transit Master Plan. And what that would be is what a future with on-demand service could look like. As Councillor McDermott alluded to, one of the reasons this is recommended is we don't have a stable ridership right now to be able to do a lot of that analysis and a lot of that study. Our ridership is around 44% of what it typically would be. So ideally, we would have kind of a stable transit route system before we could actually do some of these studies and some of that analysis.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Okay, well, that's where I was headed with this, and I'll come back to, the downtown is vitally important to the growth and prosperity of the city. There's no question about it. So, I agree with the council colleagues that have spoken to deferral of some of the downtown project, the downtown construction, Regent Street in particular, if that can be put off for a year or more, or $600,000, I think is attributed to that, go a long way to balancing the budget. The reason I asked the question about this fixed route analysis is because equally important on the back burner in the downtown has been the discussion of moving the buses on King Street, to another location. And I actually thought that the transit master plan, or what the outfall, from the discussion on the transit master plan was going to head in that direction. And I'm asking the question because I think that is a major positive development for the downtown. In other words, creating another, another streetscape right in the heart of the downtown between York, Carleton, or from Westmoreland to Regent, for that matter. And I actually thought that this route analysis might in fact be looking at removing the buses, the hub and spoke initiative. And if it isn't, then I'm wondering why that's not in the budget, why it wasn't placed, in the budget to analyze that. Because I think all of the parties agree, that moving the buses off of King Street to another location is important. I think King's Place agrees with that. And certainly downtown Fredericton agrees with that. So anyway, hopefully someone give me an answer as to why that it has not been budgeted as a part of the overall transit initiative. Again.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess overall, the initiative to put the transit off the front side of King Street and over onto Brunswick Street does involve a third-party partner, and that is King's Place themselves. That was one of the concepts that was discussed early on there. I think one of the issues too, when you look at COVID and the impacts to COVID, office buildings are impacted by this as well. So I don't think we're in a position right now, as was mentioned before, about the transit itself and the ridership right now in transit, but also can a office building afford a significant capital upgrade right now to allow transit to be moved behind there. I think that's where we are with that. And I don't know if Dylan or Ken want to add on a little bit more about that.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, well, I'll add something to it. We've been talking about it for probably 10 years. It was a good idea 10 years ago, and it's still a good idea. And I downtown Fredericton would endorse it heartily. And I understand King's Place is ready for it. And I know there's some niceties to work out on the parking, capacity of King's Place, but that's why, studying and understanding what's involved in the removal of the buses to another location in the downtown is a study worth undertaking. So I'm making that case.
We have at the moment 5 councillors on the speakers list. We have 3 minutes left in the time allotted to us for our meeting tonight. We do have meeting space carved out for the same conversation tomorrow night. So as your chair, I would suggest that we proceed with having that meeting tomorrow night, that councillors do their best to remember the questions that they have in mind at this point in the meeting. We do need to move on to the normal open CIC, I believe, Mr. Mayor. Alicia, do you have any further comments you'd like to make tonight before we adjourn this agenda or finish this agenda for the evening?
Not specifically related to this topic, but what I would like to ask if council is open to changing some of the meeting dates going forward. If that is an option, we would like to defer the final budget sessions, obviously not for next week. So the question would be if we could discuss grants on the 9th, if we could discuss the service-based budgets on the 16th, 17th. Hopefully we would have some additional information on and any other levels of government funding coming forward. And then with the potential of having the final budget read on November 23rd, if council's open to that.
Thank you, Alicia. And if you do have concerns or questions, if you could respond by email, that would be fantastic. And with that point, this portion of the meeting is over.
Can we have 5 minutes before we start the next one?
Okay. Oh, God. Which is hideous. Yeah. Oh, I can take this off. No, I can't, because someone came to talk to me.
I didn't see anything for conflict.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. On UNV? Yeah.
I don't have these.
Yeah. You should be extra careful.
I looked at it, really,
Okay. Yeah, I need one for any time you declare. Do you want me to go do a?
Take 3 more hours. They might have the U.S. election finished before we get
Oh, there you go.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll call the meeting to order. This is the council and committee meeting. Before we commence, does anybody have a conflict of interest on either of the two agenda items? No? All right. We'll proceed. Chris McPherson is going to lead off, and then we'll have our city clerk, Jennifer Murray, lead us through the first item.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the title says, it's an update on the ad hoc committee on gender diversity recommendations, of which Councillor Rogers and Erickson were a part of. And so this is simply an information item, and Jennifer's going to go through the various recommendations that were put forth and referred to the clerk and I about where they're at on each of the items. So, Jennifer.
Thank you. So first off, first slide, the ad hoc committee on gender diversity. Get this. So if you recall correctly, in January 27th, 2020, the council approved the recommendations from the ad hoc committee on gender diversity. And just a little refresh on the mandate. So it was about gender sensitivity within council committees, and on committees that require the approval of council, as well as gender representation on council committees and on committees that require the approval of council. So first off, the first recommendation was to adopt the Fredericton Council Code of Conduct Bylaw and Policy, which was passed on August the 10th. And you've all received a copy and signed off on that. Recommendation number 2 was to provide ongoing professional development for councillors and committee members. So we've been working, a group of us have been working on council orientation for 2021. And as part of that, we're going to build into the year different training aspects for council, including items like the GBA Plus training, which was provided to council earlier this year. We'll also look at other areas that council can work on with respect to training. Item number 3 was require the completion of the GBA Plus online training course for all chairs of committee. All chairs have completed this training and provide their certificate to the city clerk's office. So that's been completed. The fourth recommendation was to amend the administrative report to include a GPA plus lens. And so we've been working on there's been a staff committee working on a redesign of the administrative report format. We're sort of considering two different aspects for the administrative report, sort of breaking it out to a request for a decision and an information update. And so as part of that redesign, we're looking at how we include GBA plus lens into the format of that report. So that'll come forward to council at some point here soon. And then recommendation was for number 5 and 6. 5 was to review current practices for requesting applications for appointments to committees. And 6 was to review the current appointment process and propose changes based on best practices. So we've had our research planners have been looking across the country at some of the best practices for appointment process. We've been trying to, as we've had appointments this year, such as the Tree Commission and the library, trying to work with them in the interim to try and make sure that we're sort of kind of lining up with best practices. So we're working on some proposed changements to the boards and commissions operating procedure and to make sure that we're having a diversity sort of lens when we're looking at these things. So there is in the works sort of like the checklist and a best practice process that we're working through that starts with sort of identifying the committee and what the needs are for the individual committee, what sort of requirements or what skill sets we're looking for the committee. And then when we have a vacancy, kind of looking at what the gaps are from a representation of the community perspective on skill sets and whatnot. So, and then what we do through our recruitment process is we'll sort of do a more our process would look to attract people who are able to fill the gaps that we have identified on those committees. So the last recommendation was to create a gender-friendly procedural bylaw and administrative policies. We've been trying to do amendments to the procedural bylaw all fall on standing committees, and hopefully when we get through that process, we can turn our minds to making the procedural bylaw more gender-friendly as well. So that is our update on where we're at on the recommendations.
Thank you, City Clerk. Any questions? Councillor McGarity.
I just want to thank the committee for all the work they've done and time sensitive at that. And it's good, but I think we can do better. We're talking about gender, but we're not going to talk about age friendly, about our seniors, our youth at the other end of the scale, accessibility. So when we do have policies, we should have something built in to look at all these lenses going forward, so we don't exclude anybody in this city. So I think that's the goal that we have to achieve. This is a real good start, but we can do a lot better. So thank you very much.
Thank you. City Clerk, and to echo the words, when I proposed this committee and put some terms of reference together and asked Councillor Rogers and Erickson to get involved and lead the process, and it led to where we are now with staff involvement and outside expertise engagement. And I know the first step was the gender. That was our glaring opportunity at the time, and I think the full intent is that over the course of time we'll move on to other groups of interest or that are being overlooked. So I think we made some great strides here in the last little while. It took a while to get going, but there were things just taking root now. And once we get the procedural bylaw in place, things will pick up and it'll gain even more steam. So to your point, Councillor McGarity, I think we'll be getting at those in due course. We can only do so much at a time, but this has been a great start. So City Clerk, thanks for that presentation. And Councillor Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you so much, Jennifer. It's nice to see some of these recommendations that we worked hard on with some community members, some committed community members put together these recommendations. It's nice to see them now being implemented and incorporated. And I think to Councillor McGarity's point, I know with the GBA plus analysis and the recommendations that come through that, It's that we do look at all those intersectionalities. So in my understanding, even when you're talking about when you're the tree commission and the library, and I know that when the researchers are looking for best practices, often when it talks about encouraging gender, it's always the encouragement of all the of lots of different defining characteristics. So I think that, not to say that we should take that lightly, but I think in a way it takes care of itself when we're intentionally sensitive and looking to have diversity in our various committees, and looking to have a procedural bylaw that is more sensitive to people of diverse backgrounds. I think that benefits everyone. So it was gender that brought us to the table, but it's forcing us to be intentionally sensitive about lots of different defining characteristics. So I'm glad that this work has begun, and I think it will be really interesting to see the procedural bylaw. That was always going to be the one that was most challenging. And maybe we'll be creating some new things here. Maybe we'll be starting, maybe Fredericton will be a trendsetter. So thanks for all that work, City Clerk.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next item. 1.2, the one of our favorite topics, the procedural bylaw of the City of Fredericton. And our own Councillor John McDermott is going to lead us through this one. Yeah. The microphone's yours, Councillor.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I mean, we're all familiar with where we're at. We met here, what was that, like 2 weeks ago, and had a conversation. We had 4 items on that conference to deal with, and I think we got through 1, 2, and 3 fairly well. There wasn't any question, really. It was that 4th item in regards to the changing of language surrounding each of the standing committees and what their duties and responsibilities were. And in the package for this evening's meeting, there was included a conceptual sample of what terms of reference would be. So I guess I want to just go back to the to the staff report, and I'm looking for the exact item on it. But really, what we're doing is we're taking what we're part of bylaw E19, we're taking out of it, and it's going back into our terms of reference. And I think that's reflected when you look at the E19 procedural bylaws as what the proposal for the rewriting of it would be in regards to that those items have been removed. You will find in the conceptual sample for the Governance and Civic Engagement Standing Committee. So I guess at this point, look, I don't know if there's much I can really talk about. Does anyone? Councillor Chase has a question. Councillor Erickson has a question.
All right.
Okay.
We'll go in that order. Jason Erickson to start with.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Chair, to Councillor McDermott. And I'll try not to make this too challenging. But look, I think it's a good piece of work. You know, what you've done is you've come back with a revision that, I think would meet the need. My concern going back a couple of weeks was fairly straightforward. I understood the importance of, paring down the wording in the bylaw, but I also felt that it's extremely important that the terms of reference of the committee be identified somewhere, somewhere in a format that, is not changeable willy-nilly, but rather, the terms of reference for each committee should be in a document that council would look at, not necessarily in the bylaw itself, but somewhere that, when the new council takes office and gets its kick at the terms of reference, that becomes codified in some fashion. And, any modifications are done in a proper procedural way. So that, and I think that is what you've attempted to do here. I did have a question as it pertains to the governance committee, or what are we calling it here? There was
Civic
the Governance and Civic Engagement Committee. I do have some history with the formation of that committee. And looking at one of the objectives of that committee was to strengthen the partnerships that we have with various key strategic organizations around the city. They range from, say, other government entities, the local governments, St. Mary's First Nation government, to such things as University of New Brunswick, St. Thomas, Base Gagetown. You get it, that these are key strategic partners in the Fredericton region. And I just didn't see reference to strengthening these necessary partnerships in any of the committee terms of reference. And I think it's vitally important that we do, frame, include the strengthening of partnerships in the mandate of, and probably the Governance and Civic Engagement Committee.
Nothing has been removed. And I would say that really for any of the standing committees, when we come up with those terms of reference, it's not going to be up to the standing committee to say that this is what our terms of reference are. It's going to be up to council to say this is what our terms of reference are. It's going to be council who votes on it. Now, ideally, you reference a post-May 2021 experience where we get back into this process of doing it. It will be facilitated. The idea is to facilitate it through the Governance and Civic Engagement Standing Committee, with the understanding that that's going to be all of council that's going to be making those decisions. So to your point, fine, bring it on. I guess is in the context of how those terms of reference are being crafted, who's crafting it, how they're being crafted, and who's making a final decision on it. That's something that can absolutely be a part of it.
Councillor Erickson.
Thank you, Worship. And John, thank you, and Chris, and the rest of the members of the committee that have been working on this. I appreciate the hard work that's gone into this, and I think I'm coming to terms with the vision you have moving forward. I guess I still have a very basic question, though, that I'm struggling with, which is, what problem does this solve? I do not see. I'll continue for a second.
Yep.
It does say in the staff report that having our procedural bylaw ensconced in a bylaw format means that it cannot be changed quickly or easily. I'm unaware of us needing to change it quickly and easily. Like in my time on council, which is oddly now 9 years, I've never been denied the ability or seen council thwarted by us not having a nimble bylaw procedure available to us. And I'm concerned in that regard. I see these changes being important and valuable, but I'd be comfortable if we had developed the terms of reference for the standing committees first, if we had gone back and looked at the programs first and then brought all that together. I'm a little less comfortable just deleting a whole bunch of stuff and saying it'll be fine when we fill in the gaps. And that's kind of what I see happening here.
Okay.
But anyway, those are my concerns at the moment.
Yeah, and look, I understand, like, what problem does it solve? And I think you're right. One of the things that look, and it may be that I was the only one with concern and drove it, is in terms of flexibility. And I think it offers a little bit more flexibility in terms of how we structure those standing committees today, or going forward, versus how we do it today. Whereas today, we don't have the flexibility without reopening bylaw A19 and going through that whole process. By taking it outside, it gives us that flexibility to look at it to the point of Councillor Chase, in terms of having these high-level aspirational points in terms of who those third parties, those external partners are specific to that, instead of embedding it in the bylaw. It allows us to take it outside And should those terms change, then we don't have to necessarily reopen bylaw A19 and go through that process. So does it solve a problem? I guess, you know what, you're right. For the most part, it doesn't solve a problem, but I think it does reflect the reality that the way that we're functioning now as from a governance point of view is very different from the way that we did it 4 years ago, 8 years ago.
Just one more point. I guess the solution to this moment historically is to have a clause in your procedural bylaw that says, or other duties as assigned by council. And then you're done. But anyway.
Okay.
Councillor Millet.
Thank you, Worship. I have full confidence in the work that was done by the committee on this. I'm comfortable and I actually like the flexibility that this brings. For that reason, I'll move the recommendation.
There was, yeah, okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, there was the options and the recommendation is the staff, right? Okay, seconded by Councillor Chase. On the question. Councillor McGarity on the question, or, yeah, go ahead.
This is some good work, and actually we should imprint something to the effect of every 5 years we should look at how we govern ourselves. Now, something right in a bylaw, and that might be where we're forced to look at what changes, because change is happening so fast. I mean, last 10, 12 years, who would ever thought that we went from 7.5 million down to less than $1 million on a community grant? No one's seen that coming. Mm-hmm. No one's seen COVID-19 coming. And I can tell you this, municipal reform is coming, and I don't know what in form. It could come heavy or it could come light. So don't take the eye off the ball on that one. I can tell you that. So a lot of the stuff we're doing tonight, we could be here again looking at a whole different playing field. I can tell you that. And on the terms of reference, let's not make it too restrictive, because we don't want to make it hard for people to join committees and handcuff people. But what I see here tonight is something that we can work with, and it's an evolving process. Look, we have to come back in a year or two time, or the new council has to look at it again, so be it. There's no fixed answer here, so I think the work that's been done is good. And, you know, I'm going to support it. Thank you.
Good. Seeing there's no more questions, all those in favor of the motion? Those against? Motion is carried. Congratulations, everybody. We've done it. And Councillor McDermott, Councillor Peters, and the staff that were assisting along with the governance committee, thanks for bringing this forward. And we've had a pretty solid debate over the last several months on this one. And we've come up with something that is going to lead us forward in the future. Thanks, everybody. This is the end of the open meeting, and I'll ask council to convene in the back room for the next session.
Your worship, I only have
Wayne, you cut out. Do you want I think Alicia.
Sorry about that. Yes, I have in addition to the budget request